Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Fairfield County webinar, Protecting Your Data Against Cyber Threats. I'm Steve Smith, the webinar coordinator here at SCORE, and I'll be your host today. Our presenter is going to be Michael DePalma of Datto Corporation. Actually, let me tell you that we're doing this webinar from their headquarters in Norwalk on Route 7 as we speak. I'll tell you more about Michael in a minute, but first you have to listen. For those of you who heard this before, I apologize. A little bit of background on SCORE and who we are. SCORE is actually a part of the Small Business Administration of the United States government. We have over 300 offices throughout the United States and over 10,000 volunteers. SCORE was started in the mid-'60s as a part of the Small Business Administration, as I said. In Fairfield County, we have over 130 volunteers, and our territory kind of ranges from Bridgeport on down through Greenwich. We have individuals here, some of whom are retired, some of whom are still working, who offer industry, process, subject matter expertise, and we offer basically three value-added services into the marketplace. One-on-one counseling, these webinars and workshops, and then our website, which is a wealth of information about frequently asked questions on how to run a business, as well as a way to get to the archives of these webinars. I'll tell you more about that in just a second. Yeah, we do, our offices are at 111 East Avenue in Norwalk, from which we do one-on-one counseling. For those of you that might have a specific in-depth question about how to run the financials of your business, how to maximize digital marketing, things of that nature, even grant writing, we have experts who can help you with those things on a one-on-one basis. We also obviously offer workshops and webinars. You're on a webinar. The workshop program, we do about 125 workshops per year, usually from libraries throughout Fairfield County. And the topics that we do there are available for your review on our website, which again is fairfieldcounty.score.org. The webinars that we produce are recorded, and they're stored technically on YouTube, and you access them via fairfieldcounty.score.org. Very easy, 2 clicks, and you can get to the archives. You can see them listed when you go there, and they're usually, like this one, is going to be an hour in length. I really would encourage you to go to the website, though, because you do get a lot of intellectual capital there that can help you on an on-demand basis, run your business more efficiently. Probably also tell you what you don't know, which would set you up well for workshops, webinars, and one-on-one counseling. Our next webinar is going to be November 13th, and the subject, very interesting one, the art of professional rebranding. Just on a personal note, in the last 15 years, my wife has morphed her business 3 times, and the subject of rebranding or modifying the brand comes up constantly as you kind of morph your businesses. You'll be getting the usual reminders about that. You've already probably gotten one, or else you will very shortly. They usually go out 3 weeks in advance, 3 days in advance, and then the day before. So let's talk about today. This webinar is going to end sharply at 1 o'clock. And as I said before, it is being recorded, both the slides as well as the audio, and they'll be available at fairfieldcounty.score.org later today. Let me focus on that, later today, not immediately at the conclusion of the webinar. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will be receiving an email asking you to evaluate the quality, and I really appreciate your input on that. We actually do use it. Now, our speaker. Michael DePalma is Channel Development Manager at Datto Corporation, located here in Norwalk. It goes way beyond Norwalk. It's a large organization, very powerful in this cybersecurity space. Michael, in that role, educates large business audiences about the current business environment, what cyber threats that could jeopardize that industry and their businesses, and how other businesses have succeeded in reaching their growth potential. Michael represents the firm at trade shows and technology conferences, and this sounds a little daunting, has actually presented alongside members of the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. That's way beyond my pay grade, so I'm going to turn it over to Michael right now, and at the end, we'll talk about questions and answers for about the last 10 minutes. I'm sorry, I should have said before, post your questions down in the chat room in the lower left-hand part of your screen. I'll monitor it, and we'll take the last 10 or 15 minutes to answer those questions. Okay, Michael, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining us. If anybody is having trouble with any audio, obviously just put a comment into the Q&A field. So I'm Mike DePalma, as Steve mentioned, Channel Development Manager with Datto. So we're located, headquartered right here in Norwalk, Connecticut. Folks that are familiar, we're in the Merit 7 buildings. We occupy 4 floors. I know we're talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, so it's a really cool story that I'll just spend a minute on about Datto. So our founder started the company when he was 22 years old, started building these backup devices by hand in his parents' basement. Kind of had this idea that, backup was kind of an antiquated piece of technology. There was a lot of innovations going on at the enterprise level, but in terms of the small to mid-sized business level, there wasn't a ton of innovation. So he had this idea. And so worked his way up, started the company, 5-6 years of struggling times, but about 10 years passed, and he's, really a successful business at this point. 2017, we're at about 1,000 employees, and the Wall Street Journal gave us a $1 billion valuation. We were the only unicorn company in the state of Connecticut. So truly one of those basement to billion, type of stories, which is really interesting. And now he's 33, still very involved, very down-to-earth guy. He's from Newtown and now lives in Norwalk. So now we're up over 14,000 employees worldwide, and we actually have one of the largest private data centers in the world. We protect over 450 petabytes of data. And so a lot of folks don't really understand what a petabyte of data looks like, but most people know the size of an MP3 file, for example. If you have 1 petabyte of MP3 files, you can play music continuously for 2,000 years. So that's the kind of data that we're talking about here. And that's what we protect, all in our private cloud. But we're going to talk about today some of the threats that are out there and some of the limitations through what most folks are using as backup that the criminal world is exploiting. Now, backup in general is not something that most small businesses want to really talk about. One of the questions when I'm at these conferences, people always start their presentation with the cliche, okay, what keeps you up at night? But the truth is, most small businesses that I talk to, this type of stuff does not keep them up at night. Right? You're thinking about your bottom line. You're thinking about a lot of other factors, keeping your workforce in place. And so these type of threats typically aren't on the top of mind. And when you look at making the backup in particular, it's not really something that folks really want to talk about. But that being said, most of the small businesses that I talk to, they are backing up their data in some way, which is great. And really you have to kind of look at your business model, the type of business. There's nobody that's going to tell you this is the backup model that you need to protect yourself, because every business is going to vary by industry and size. But for the most part, there's some traditional forms of backup that are being used. Obviously, external hard drives are very popular. We still see tape all throughout the country. I get to travel all around North America. You'd be surprised how many folks are still using tape, even up into the mid-sized world. And then we're seeing this shift to the cloud, obviously. A lot of folks are moving their data back up to the cloud, which is great in terms of having that second copy of your data in a different geographical location. But the criminals know that this is what most of the small business community is using, and they know ways to exploit that. And those, the ways they do that are through some of these limitations, right? There's going to be a higher failure rate through some of these commoditized backup solutions. That's a very great advantage for the criminals. They attack you with a ransomware, for instance, and you go to restore from a backup. You're not aware that these backups are failing. They've got you. You're going to pay that ransom. There's a risk of infection or theft. Most small businesses that I talk to, they've got one backup. It's an external hard drive that they either keep in the office or somebody from the office brings it home with them on the weekend. There's a lot of risk there. If your one form of backup is in a place that's very close to your office or going down a mile down the road, obviously you're running the risk of that either being damaged or stolen, and now all of your backups are now gone. The manual aspect of it, if you were to talk to any cybersecurity expert, they will tell you that the biggest threat to the small business community is user error. You see, the most of the time when you see data deletion that was inadvertent or malicious activity, it came in through user error. And this wasn't usually the intention of that employee. They're just not aware of what they should be looking out for. And so usually these criminals are looking to exploit user error. So that also ties into your backup, and you have somebody manually taking that backup and testing that backup. This obviously becomes an advantage to the criminals. Right? Most people can tell me how often they're backing up their data for the most part, but the testing aspect is what most small businesses cannot answer for me. They don't know who's testing it, how often that's being tested, and so that data backup is very unsecure. And then lastly, and this is the biggest one, is slow recovery time. We live in a fast-paced world now. The more downtime you incur from one of these infections, or even just traditional server goes down, or there's a fire or flood, you get another superstorm up here. That downtime is really what impacts the business more than even the lost data. And the criminals know this, and they have that as an advantage. So I always point to this slide. I think it's an important slide to understand. And if you really to take away anything from this presentation, I would say this slide right here. And these are the two acronyms I'd like you to take away, because the criminals are very, very aware of these two acronyms. First one is the RPO, the Recovery Point Objective. Basically what that means is how much data are you at risk of losing at any given time. Simply put, how often are you taking your backups? Is it hourly? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Everyone's going to have a different answer as to how aggressive you need that RPO to be. But think about how much data you can lose and realistically keep up and running. Right? So everybody's going to have a different answer. I have plenty of businesses that say a weekly backup is fine. I have others that say, hey, I need a backup every 15 minutes. For the most part, folks can understand this and can make that decision about their RPO schedule and make sure they're secure. And the criminals know that. If you get hit with ransomware, we're going to get into that in a little bit about exactly what that looks like. But they've got these two pieces of leverage. The first piece of leverage is obviously they've locked up your data. It's all encrypted. You don't have access to it. So if you don't have backups of that data, then there's no other recourse but to pay, and the criminals know that. But they also know that for the most part, small businesses understand this, and they do have a backup. And hopefully they're testing it, and they can take care of that side of the screen, the RPO side of the screen. So what's the other piece of leverage that these criminals have? That's now the right-hand side of the screen. This is your RTO, which is your Recovery Time Objective. How much downtime would you incur if your systems were to go down for any reason, whether it is a malicious attack from one of these criminals, or whether it's a server crash, or whether it is a disaster within your site? How long would it take you to get back up and running, and not just get your data back, but a true production environment? This is the piece of leverage they have, because what they will do is they will price that ransom payment at a more attractive price than whatever that downtime would cost you. They're going to ask for $1,000, knowing that if it's going to take you 2 or 3 days to get your data back, the cost of that is going to be far greater than that cost of the ransom payment. I'm going to give you some real-life examples of what this looks like. But that downtime is critical. You look at small businesses and some of the reports that are out there, and they vary, but some of the reports that are out there in terms of a business that is down for a week or more, PricewaterhouseCoopers put out a study saying that 71% of those small businesses are closed within 12 months. And so this is the type of stat. And you can do that research on your own, but there's some pretty scary statistics. So businesses know this, criminals know this, and that's why they get so many of these folks to pay. When you look at the sophistication, the other piece of this is really who's behind these attacks. Because for the most part, people think, all right, this is the guy in his basement, doesn't want to get a real job. They're going to do these attacks, make a few $1,000s a week, and they're fine, right? They're not going to get caught. And that's what it was really for years. You had these attackers that would do attacks, maybe not even to make money, just so they can go on the web and brag to their friends anonymously about, hey, did you see the news about that attack? That was me. There was a community of hackers that did that. But now they've really figured out how to monetize it, and the folks behind it have now shifted. This is now what organized crime is doing throughout the country, throughout the world. This is where some of the foreign governments have gotten into, some of the terrorists around the world, these terrorist organizations, because there's so much money to be made. And so Steve mentioned that I presented alongside of folks from the FBI probably about a dozen times over the last year or so. But I was doing a presentation last May in Allentown, Pennsylvania, alongside a gentleman from the FBI. He was actually the head of cybersecurity for the Philadelphia office. And this was now 2 weeks after an attack that made worldwide news called WannaCry. Most folks have at least heard of it because it really was on the front page of every paper, lead story on every website. This was the largest single-day attack in the history. We had 220,000 computers worldwide impacting 150 countries from a single virus in a single day. We've never seen anything like this. What was a little bit unique to this variant of ransomware was, for the most part, what these criminals do, they're going to gather as much information about your business ahead of time. So when they make that attack, they know what kind of company you are, the size, the scope of what you guys are doing, so that when they price that ransom payment, it's enough where they can make as much as possible, but it's not too much where they know you won't pay. With this particular variant, they didn't try to do any of that. There was nothing within the variant that could tell them information about that business. So they asked for $300 across the board, whether it was a small business, a one-man nonprofit, all the way up to Fortune 500 companies. It was $300 across the board. So they only netted about $300,000 out of this attack, and that might seem like a large amount of money. But the FBI estimated that over the last year, about $1 billion changed hands between the business community and these ransomware criminals. Well, $300,000 really isn't a lot of money. So in the IT community, the consensus really was, okay, this was just a test. This was phase one. It was a cool new toy. They could infect a lot of companies all at once. Next phase is going to be, all right, now we're going to really figure out how to monetize. So at this presentation I was doing out in Allentown, that was, that was my conclusion, right? So now the FBI agent comes up and he's telling some really scary stories about cyber warfare and all of these different attacks that are coming out. But he finishes with ransomware because at the time, remember, this is 2 weeks after WannaCry, this is the hot button topic of the day. So he goes through what the FBI is, who they think is behind it and all the rest, and then they come to two conclusions. He reiterated what I said. He said, I agree with Michael. We're waiting for that phase 2 to come, and we're preparing, trying to figure out what vulnerabilities were exploited. But we have a second theory. And at the time, I thought it was kind of a far-fetched theory. But as the months went on, I think there's a lot of validity to it. And what the second theory the FBI had was that this attack had nothing to do with making money. That $300,000 that they made was pure gravy. Second theory says that the attack had one goal, and that was to scare the world into buying Bitcoin. We've all heard about Bitcoin over the last several months, but for years it's been around, and it's kind of been something that's on the fringe. Now, what's unique to these criminals is Bitcoin, for those of you not familiar, it's an anonymous online currency. Kind of started with this utopian idea that we're going to create a currency completely anonymous, not tied to any government, so governments couldn't come in and artificially inflate it or deflate it. It was truly going to be run and driven by the markets. Right? Beautiful idea. But the anonymity of it became very, very attractive to the criminals. So we started seeing folks on the dark web selling drugs, selling weapons, doing some very devious things. But they figured out that they can tie Bitcoin to this ransomware delivery system, which is pretty simple. Basically, ransomware is getting through an email. Looks like every other email in your inbox. It's going to have a hyperlink or attachment that you click on, downloads the virus, and they can get you infected. And once they figured out that they could tie this to Bitcoin, which is anonymous, they realized that they had a huge cash cow. Now, Bitcoin has been pretty flat since its existence. You would see it, around $100, $200. It would drop to $50. And so it started out in 2016 at about $440 for a single Bitcoin. Now, in 2017, that was close to $1,000. If you're looking at the screen, you see that first blip, that first real increase. That was May of 2017. Because what was happening was you had these large organizations preparing for that phase 2 that the IT community was telling them was coming, and that the worldwide government community was telling them was coming as well. And the thing about Bitcoin is it's not like you walk into your local bank and say, I want to fund the Bitcoin account. You've got to go find Bitcoin exchange, set up an account, fund that account. The price is changing by the minute, so it's hard to know exactly what to fund. And I could tell you a real-life example. Here at Datto, there's 4 folks on my team that do these educational kind of seminars. And they gave us all a Bitcoin account just because we talk about it and want to know, okay, let's get hands-on. You could really understand it. So they gave us $100 in Bitcoin. Set up an account, give them the code to send it over. They send it over, and it took 6 days for that $100 to get funded into my account. And by the time it got there, it was only worth $87. And the point of that is, it's going to take you a while. Think about if you're a large company that might get asked for $50,000, or even a small business is going to be asked for $1,500. There's going to be downtime just in setting up that account. So what the business community around the world is doing is, let's prepare. Hopefully all of our anti-intrusion solutions are in place. We've got backup, but we need that last line of defense, and that is we have to pay these criminals. So you started seeing large transactions on the Bitcoin world. And so the markets followed it, like every other market does. And we saw that big bonanza in Q4 where it skyrocketed. And it actually peaked at close to $20,000, and it opened this year at $15,000. Now it's down in the $5,000, $6,000 range. But you would read stories about the 19-year-old and techie guy who invested in it 3 years ago and became a millionaire, or the savvy investor who got in on it early. And those are feel-good stories that the news report on. But the folks that made hundreds of millions of dollars in Q4 of last year were the criminals, because they've been perpetrating these ransomware attacks for 5-6 years now, collecting these Bitcoins while they were worth $50, $60, $100. Think about the money that those Bitcoins were worth when it was spiking to $20,000. A lot of this sell-off now, they believe, is through the criminal community. They're cashing out. They've made their $1 billion off of this big spike. And whether this is true or not, again, this is just a theory. Regardless, the results were, in fact, true. These criminals made money hand over fist when that all occurred. And the importance of this is twofold. One, it shows you the sophistication of these folks behind these attacks. Again, this is large criminal enterprises with corporate structures that are forward-thinking, thinking about how they can make money. But the second scary part of it is now they don't really care if you pay or not. You might not get your data back. The statistics a couple of years ago were about 3 in 4 businesses that paid the ransom got their data back. A quarter of them did not. That number has been reduced to about 60 to 62%, according to the latest statistics from the cybersecurity world. So now you're looking at a 4 in 10 chance that you do go and set up a Bitcoin account, and you are down for a week, and you pay this ransom, and you still don't get your data back. And again, when we see just a huge spike in the real epidemic that this has become, on the screen now I'm showing you some of the more prevalent variants of ransomware out there. There's various statistics out there about how many variants there are, but the last I heard were about 4 million. And now ransomware has been around for 30 years. The first known attack was 1989. You'd see it blip up every now and again, but 2013 is when we saw CryptoLocker, which was the first really big attack out there. And we saw a huge spike. But what happened in 2013? Well, these criminals figured out that they could marry this very easy delivery system with Bitcoin, which was anonymous, and they know they wouldn't get caught. That same FBI agent was asked, how many of these criminals have you caught? And he says, look, I've been the head of cybersecurity in Philadelphia for 6 years. Right? We've caught some of those folks that have different phishing schemes, which is, hey, I'm a vendor, wire me some money, it goes to some overseas bank account. If they can catch that by the end of the business day, they could reverse that. But in terms of ransomware, over 6 years, he said they haven't caught a single criminal, 0, because of the anonymity. What they're trying to do is figure out ways to educate the community and figure out what those vulnerabilities are, but they're not catching these guys because it's anonymous. And this is what's really scary. And again, I talk about the folks that are behind it. It's getting even scarier. I tell stories about the different ransomware variants that I find very creative or, interesting. And one of the ones I've been talking about for the last several years is this variant known as Popcorntime. Very funny name, and people, maybe have not heard of it. The news hasn't covered it that much, but it's particularly evil because what it does is you'll get a scary red screen that says we've encrypted your data. Please pay us in Bitcoin. Or they give you a second option, and that second option is to go out and infect 2 other businesses for them. Do their work for them. And once you've successfully sent that email out and encrypted 2 other businesses, they will unencrypt your data. So I'm sitting on a panel earlier this year, and I'm telling the story, and I'm sitting on a panel next to what they call an ethical hacker, which really means he used to be a criminal, now he's on the good guy's side. But he really understands what these criminals are trying to do. And he said in his community, they believe that this particular variant, again, doesn't have anything to do with making money off of these ransom payments. The idea here is this is an attack to try to disrupt our economy, create distrust among our economy. And this could be done by foreign agents, just from hackers who are anarchists and want to do damage. But there's actual facts behind this. The next really large attack after WannaCry was called NotPetya, which actually had a larger financial impact to the world than WannaCry did, and that's already been connected to the Russian government. Their intention there was to just disrupt the Ukrainian economy, but once it's out in the cyber world, it's going to impact everyone. And so we are seeing it. So really, at this point, the small business community, mid-sized business community are kind of being used as pawns here for a much larger goal. I was just last week doing a presentation with an FBI agent, and he was talking about the same type of thing, who's behind all this stuff. And he says, we put a lot of sanctions on these terrorist groups, trying to stop them. They're still making money. How are they doing it? Well, this is one of the ways that they're doing it. It's through these attacks. They can make a lot of money, fund all these things that they're trying to do with very little risk of being caught. So, this is some scary stuff. So it truly is a widespread epidemic. And I mentioned the $1 billion number earlier, which is the money that actually changed hands. But the actual impact to the business community worldwide was closer to $75 billion. There's various reports about that, but they're all pretty close. And what makes up this $75 billion? Right? $1 billion change hands in actual ransom payments, but the $75 billion includes the ripple effect of loss of data and that downtime, and the amount of businesses that completely go out of business because they could never recover. Again, folks that could take care of that left-hand side of the screen for the most part, but don't understand the cost of downtime and aren't protected. And so that impact is massive. And I'm going to tell you a couple stories. But I also want to go into the sophistication of these folks. Again, it used to be the hackers who'd find a virus and they'd go out, but these guys are really smart now. And you might have heard the term Internet of Things and how everything's connected. You might have also read the story last year, and a lot of folks haven't, about the greatest casino heist ever perpetrated, ever. And it wasn't the kind of casino heist that you think. Not the guys coming in, trying to sneak through the back door with guns or security, clearance things. That's not what occurred. What these criminals were able to do is they hacked into this casino's internal system through its internet-connected fish tank thermometer. They figured out that everything was connected, and through this thermometer on their fish tank out in the lobby, they were able to hack into the system. And what they were able to gather were all of the personal information from their high rollers. Now we're talking about information that's worth billions of dollars. The greatest casino heist ever pulled was done through a thermometer that was connected to their internet. This is the kind of sophistication that we're talking about, right? So again, another story straight from the FBI. I'm doing a presentation. Large is about 150, 180 folks in the room. I do my presentation, FBI agent does his. And he wanted to go into what was behind these attacks. How are they getting through? And he shows a picture of a house initially. He says, anybody recognize this house? And so everybody's looking at it. About a few seconds go by, and this guy raises his hand. He goes, hey, that's my house. That's my house. And he goes, congratulations, beautiful house. And I heard that you just got a promotion at work a few weeks ago. That's fantastic. Now he starts rattling off all these facts about this gentleman in the room. He says, I bet you think I used all my tools at my disposal at the FBI to gather this information about this gentleman. Nope. What I did is I got a registration list from the organizer of the event. I picked one of you at random. I found you on LinkedIn. And the amount of information I was able to find on LinkedIn was invaluable. So I did that for a few minutes. I said, hey, let me see if I could find them on Facebook. And I found you very quickly. I already had your face. So I knew exactly who you were. And that's where I found this beautiful picture of your house. And that's where I found out everybody congratulating you on your promotion, and it was fantastic. And in about 15 minutes, I had a really good sense of who you were, right? Just through the information that you post on social media. So what I would do if I was a criminal, I take this information and I start with the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to say, okay, I've got your information from LinkedIn, where you work, some of your coworkers. So I'm going to create a dummy email account. It's going to look like every other email you get. And I'm going to send that off to you to try to get you to click on a link. And then I'm going to say, hey, I noticed you went to Penn State. I know that Penn State's got one of the largest alumni associations in the world. You probably get emails from them all the time. So now I'm going to create an account that looks exactly like it's coming from the Alumni Association. Same template, same look and feel as every other email you've gotten. And I'm going to say, hey, click here in this hyperlink to find out all the information about your 20-year reunion. You're going to click on it because it looks like every other email in your inbox. I'm going to go down this rabbit hole of figuring out exactly how I can get through. And then one Friday, you're going to be cleaning up your inbox, trying to get home for the weekend, and I'm going to get you to sleep at the wheel, and I'm going to get you to click on it. It's no longer the emails that come out from your long-lost uncle asking for $5,000 and they're going to send you $1 million, or the Nigerian prince, or any of these types of things. Nobody's falling for those anymore, for the most part. What they're going to do is what's called socially engineered spear phishing attacks, where they're going to gather information about you, which is so public for them to do, send an email out that's going to look like every other email in your inbox. And I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure you've seen emails that you've caught that say, hey, please click here to update your Netflix account. Or I've gotten them from Verizon, or I've gotten them from all different types. I've gotten them from Apple. It looks like Apple. You need to update your account. Now, if you scroll over the actual email address, you'll see the email address has got 48 digits in it, and you realize, hey, this isn't really from Apple, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but this is the type of thing that these guys are doing, and they're attacking everyone. Nobody's safe. Police departments are a high target right now, which is very scary. Criminals love it. They love ransomware because these police departments are being attacked all over the world. You might have seen in Connecticut a few months back, our judicial system was hit here in Connecticut. But we're seeing them day after day after day. When I go out to present to specific groups, specific industries, it's very easy for me to go out and do a Google search and find relevant stories to each individual industry. Now, one of the attacks that made worldwide news, and you've probably heard of, was the city of Atlanta. They were hit with ransomware back in the spring, and they were asked for $52,000. Now, for the city of Atlanta, that doesn't seem like a huge amount of money. Think about the city of Atlanta's budget. Now, they never acknowledged whether they paid the ransomware. They didn't. For the most part, we believe that they did. But the impact, those ripple effects, were much larger than that $52,000. Well, about a month later, they came out and made a statement that right now the impact has been about $2.7 million. That included the overtime, all the consultants they have to bring in, all the lost data that they have to restore. They then had to go to the city a few months after that and ask for another $9.5 million just as a result of this attack. So their total investment, a $52,000 ransomware attack, was over $12 million. And these are large numbers, but to give you a sense of what that looks like, their total IT budget for the year is about $35 million. Now, this math is going to scale no matter what size business you are. That ransom payment, as I mentioned, is always going to be far less than the actual impact, that cost of downtime. It's about $12 million as compared to the $52,000 in ransom. This is the advantage they have. But you will see stories about the universities and the municipalities, all these really large organizations that are being hit, and you might think, well, this only happens to those folks. It doesn't happen to the small business community. That's actually false. They are actually attacking the small business community at a greater rate. Just think about it. They're a business right now, right? They're set as a corporate structure, so they have two ways to go, two different avenues. They can go and they can swing for the fences and try to go and get hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single attack, or they just go for the singles and they say, hey, I could attack several small businesses every week and get a few $1,000s from each of them, and I know that they're less protected and more apt to pay because they can't absorb the downtime, and that's what a lot of these folks would do. Of that $1 billion that changed hands, over $300 million of it came from the small business community. Now, here at Datto, we did a survey a couple of years back, and we actually are updating it. That'll come out in a couple of weeks, where we interviewed two different groups, the managed services community, so those folks that you outsource your IT to, and the small business community. And what we found was the average payment from a small business was around $2,500. Now, break down $300 million into small $2,500 increments, and you see the net that these folks are casting. It's massive. And not only are they encrypting this data, they're getting these folks to pay because they have no other recourse. And when we talk to the small businesses that were impacted, over half reported data loss, and 3 in 4 reported that business-threatening downtime that we've been talking about. And again, no industry is safe. We found attacks in every single vertical, from manufacturing to construction to legal, everywhere. Big corporate structures. And the stat that they love the most, I mentioned that we talked to two different groups of people. Of the managed services community, 9 in 10 of those folks were highly concerned about ransomware. Of the small business community, less than 4 in 10 were highly concerned about ransomware. Criminals love this statistic because they know even in that 4 in 10 they might not be protected, but 60% of those folks definitely aren't fully protected, and they know that if they infect one of those 6 in 10, they're probably going to get paid. They love this statistic, so we do a lot of different educational events like this. So next question I get all the time, all right, an epidemic, government acknowledges, they put out statements, what are they doing? Well, they have a 3-pronged attack. They're going to investigate. Now, I mentioned they're not catching many of these folks, but they investigate to try to find, their vulnerabilities. Their next step is to educate. That's why you see so many more of these FBI agents out in the field talking to small businesses, because education is the biggest part. And then what does the government love to do most, especially if you're in the Northeast? They want to regulate, right? They want to go back to their constituents and say, yes, it's an epidemic. We put in a regulation to combat this. That's what they want to do. So you may have seen out in Europe, they've got what's called GDPR. If you've got any clients out in Europe, you have to be compliant with it. It's really the most stringent cybersecurity regulation in the world. And we're seeing those same type of processes spread all over the world, including here in the States. Now, in the U.S., it's really a state-by-state and industry-by-industry type of regulation. So New York's got the most strict regulations out there, but we're seeing them spread. And here in Connecticut, the Northeast is kind of the melting pot for these new ideas, and we're seeing them spread all over the country. And so they're going to be state-specific, they're going to be industry-specific, but really what they're doing, instead of trying to just catch these guys, because none of these regulations are helping to catch these criminals or even prevent them from getting in, really what they're doing is they're shifting the burden onto the business. So not only do you have to worry about all these threats that are out there, but if you are impacted and you lose data and you have this downtime, you also have to get fined, especially if you're in a financial industry or something with personal records. You now have to worry about those fines. A lot of the small businesses that I talk to at these conferences, they're just as worried about these regulations and making sure that they're compliant as they are about the actual attack. And for the most part, what you have to do with these regulations is say, I had my best efforts to try to combat this. And you have to have a plan in place, a disaster recovery plan to say, here's what I put in place. Maybe it didn't work, but you could see that I made my best effort. Most of those folks are looking at that. And I talked earlier about how I typically present to specific industries. And what I'll do when I go out there is I'll look for the industry's organization, kind of the nationwide organization, and see what kind of tips and pitfalls they have. I'm going to talk to a group of dentists. I go to the ADA website. They all have their tips and pitfalls. Up on the screen now, I have one specific to CPA firms, but they all basically have the same type of framework. And so what this particular pitfall article said was, first and foremost, not understanding your risk. You're not staying up at night worrying about this because you don't understand really what's out there. That's what we're seeing nationwide in all different industries. Focusing solely on protection, saying, hey, I've got an antivirus, I've got an anti-malware in place, I'm safe. That's great. You have to have those things, but it's not going to prevent all these threats from getting through. Not testing your backups, that goes without saying. Educating your staff. Obviously, everyone on this webinar is hopefully taking something away from it, but the important thing is to go back and share this information with your entire staff. Everyone has to be aware of it. Not seeking outside help. It's so hard to kind of handle this in-house at this point. So working with outside consultants, working with these outside or IT folks is really the best way to stay protected. Instead of trying to handle that in-house and spending your time and your resources trying to stay up to date with this quickly changing environment, it's very important to seek that outside help. And then lastly, I think it's the most important thing, is not using framework. And what this means is, look, if you have a fire alarm that goes off, everybody in your office knows what to do. But if you get that scary red screen saying you've been impacted by ransomware, does everybody in your office know what to do? I can tell you at my previous job, if I get that scary red screen, I don't want to walk down the hall and tell my boss that I just infected our entire network. No, I'm going to try to figure out how to do it on my own. I'm going to be panicked. I'm going to call my friend down the hall who likes computers and says, hey, is there anything you could do for me? The best thing that could happen to the criminals, because the longer you wait, the more systems are going to be infected. And so everyone should know. That scary red screen comes up. What is the protocol? Who do you call? What are the next steps? This comes with having monthly or quarterly or even annual training to make sure everybody's aware of what those steps are. So I told you I was going to give you some real-life examples. This is what we're going to close with, about what that cost is, what that cost to the right side of the screen is. The first one I'll give you is again, I'll tell a story that a lot of folks have heard of. It's San Francisco Metro Transit Authority. Now, a few years back, they were hit on Black Friday with ransomware. They were asked for $73,000. And to their credit, they put out a statement immediately saying, yes, we've been hit with ransomware. We have no intention of paying these ransoms. Right? We have a very robust IT team behind us. Government recommends that we don't do this because it emboldens these guys. It puts a bigger bullseye on my back. So we're gonna get our heads together. We're gonna get back up and running. Now, the issue was the systems that were hit were their fare collection terminals. So while they were down, they couldn't collect fares on the light rail or the bus system. So they had two options. They sat down with their IT team. They said, how long are we going to be down for? They said, we've done testing on this. We know that we can be back up in a production environment in 2 days, Sunday morning. So we're looking at 2 days of not being able to collect fares. So they had two options. They could shut down the light rail and the bus system on the 2 busiest shopping days of the year, which really wasn't an option, or they can go with door number 2, which was to give away free rides. Now, the residents of the San Francisco love ransomware, right? They get to travel around for 2 days for free. And so now there wasn't a lot of follow-up stories, right? Sunday morning, they get back up and running. Folks got their free rides. They went on with their day. So they never listed how much money they lost. But I could do the math for them because, again, they list a lot of information on their website. So, okay, they're down for 2 days. I went and looked at their website. They claim that they provide 735,000 rides every single day. Now, they don't break this down to how many of these folks are on the bus or the light rail, but I do know it's $1 to jump on the bus, $2.25 for the light rail. So just in lost revenue, they lost anywhere between $1.5 and $3.3 million. Now, again, I was in New York City doing a presentation with the head of the cybersecurity unit in the FBI in the New York office. He told the same story, and I had to present after him, so he actually stole my story. Same pictures and everything. So he gets this story, he talks about the cost of downtime, but he doesn't do this math. He doesn't say, I know exactly how much they lost, but he did say, if this happened up here in New York City, we'd lose $50 million a day. Again, the math is always there. The cost of the ransom is always going to be far less than the cost of that downtime. And that's me doing the math, it's FBI doing the math. But the last story I have is actually a third-party vetted cost of what this ransom looks like. And I was on a panel with a gentleman who is a cybersecurity insurance agent. And that's a different conversation for a different day. It's definitely something you should look into. But he's obviously telling stories about why he set up cybersecurity insurance. And he gave us an example of one of his clients. This is a utility company out in Lansing, Michigan. And they were hit with ransomware. They were asked for $25,000. Now, this utility company was very large. They had an IT team of over 50 employees. So they thought they were protected. They said, we could recover this on our own. And they spent a full day trying to recover their data. And after that full day, they had to come out with a statement saying paying the ransom was the only action they could take to get back up and running and get it free from that ransom. So they get to fund a Bitcoin account, get $25,000 into it, and pay the ransom. And that's what they did. It took them a full week to recover. They had a cybersecurity insurance policy. So they said, okay, we're going to put together a claim. And their initial claim that they put together was $2.4 million for being down for that week. Now, when they looked deeper into it, they acknowledged that $400,000 of that was system upgrades that they really should have had in place, a better disaster recovery plan. They couldn't include that into their downtime claim, but they did put a claim together for $2 million. It's sent off to the insurance agency. Obviously, the underwriters are going to vet this. Now, my experience with insurance agencies are they don't tend to like to pay payments that they don't feel are true. So they're going to vet this very stringently, right? So they do this. They wind up cutting a check for $1.9 million. There was a $100,000 deductible. So obviously, this guy's talking about how great this is that they were able to cover these folks and refund them their money for that downtime. I got off the stage and I picked his brain because for me, this validates that cost of downtime. That's not me doing math. It's not the FBI doing math. This is a third-party insurance company acknowledging that cost of downtime. $25,000 for ransom, $2 million for the downtime. And I got fascinated with this story. He sent me some articles, and I found a story that 6 months later, there was an article in the local paper out in Lansing that said that of that 50-plus IT staff that they had, 25% had quit within 6 months because the environment had become too taxing. There was finger pointing, there was too much overtime, the stress got to be too much, and they left. So now on top of them spending $25,000 and having to spend almost $500,000 in upgrades, absorbing the $100,000 deductible, they now have to go out and find 15 new IT staff. Right, which is how easy for anybody that's hiring qualified IT staff to find those folks in any community is very difficult. Those are the ripple effects that we were talking about. That's what the $75 billion comes up with, right? So again, this is what we're talking about. So when you start looking at some different opportunities in terms of what a backup solution is as compared to a business continuity solution, you really got to judge that RPO and that RTO piece. Do we have enough to make sure that that RPO is aggressive enough that we know that we're not losing too much data? We can absorb an hour's worth of data, but do we have a solution in place to make sure we're up and running in time before we have that business-threatening downtime? So that's a conversation you have to go back and look at and say, okay, what is my RPO goal and what is my RTO goal? Start from there, and then you start to look at a solution that makes sense. And that's really what we're trying to do with these educational pieces. So with that, right at 12:45, so we've got some questions coming in. So I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Michael, wonderful. That was great. I learned a lot, and of course that was easy because I didn't know anything about this. So thanks for that. And I've got a couple questions here. I'm going to jump to Alexa's here, and I'm going to read it, but you read it along with me because it's fairly detailed. It's a good question, though. So she says, to check my email, I sign into Bluehost. This is secure. When I select email, URL shows cPanel. This is secure. When I access my email, no longer shows secure. When I open an email, no longer shows secure. Bluehost insists my email is secure. Is that correct?
So I'm not knowledgeable about Bluehost, but I could tell you, go look at your user agreement in your SLA. Do they guarantee that this is secure? I can tell you that, O365, they have what's called a shared responsibility model. Well, they'll protect the data within their cloud, but you are responsible for your own data. They pass on responsibility to the end user. From what my experience has been, I haven't seen anyone that will guarantee that their data is always secure. So I would still be diligent about looking at the emails that you open, the attachments that you open. You do seem to be much more secure than most businesses are. I would look into, dual-factor authentication and some of those type of things. But again, it's a multi-layered approach. To say that you're completely secure, not knowing Bluehost particularly, I wouldn't be able to answer that. I would say that you're more secure than most.
So that's a good segue into a question from Budley here. What do you recommend small business owners do as a bare bones backup? Keeping in mind, Michael, that a lot of clients of SCORE are sole proprietors or 2 or 3 employees, that kind of size. And you already made the point, of course, that I think it's like something like 70% of the ransomware attacks are for $2,000 or less. So small businesses are right in their strike zone. But so you're sitting out there, and if I were listening to this, I'd say, okay, you've upset my homeostasis for sure. I got to do something. But my income of a business is only $100,000 a year. What can I do?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And again, it's taking a step back and looking at your business, looking at your revenue. I mean, obviously, pie in the sky, you want to have a co-location that automatically flails over. That's obviously not an option for the small business community. Those first kind of slides that I had about traditional forms of backup, that's where you would start. And you would start with that external hard drive. If you've got, if you're using SaaS email systems, I would still encourage to back those up. It's very inexpensive to back up your O365 suite. When I say that, I mean it's like dollars per seat. It's not a lot of money, but it will save you because, again, that's not completely secure. So I would start there. And then you start doing that cost analysis, which you should review every year. As you're growing, that downtime starts to really justify a more aggressive solution. My next solution would be to have multiple copies of your data, not just having that one external hard drive, but having a second copy somewhere else, and hopefully in a different location, and start growing from there. And then you start getting into the space of business continuity, which is, virtualization of your servers. But for the most part, small business really can't justify that cost or can't afford it. So it is something like any other piece of technology you have. It's something you're never going to say, I've got this backup solution in place, I'm good, I don't have to worry about it for 10 years. Just like you wouldn't do that with your computer, your phone, anything else. It's an evolving industry, and it evolves with the growth of your business. So start with backing up your SaaS applications, whatever that is. If you've got on-premise data, back it up with an external hard drive. Look at a cloud backup. I would say those are great because it takes care of that, off-site solution. My only issue with it is, for the most part, if you're trying to restore from data that's in the cloud, it's going to be slower, right? Because you're looking at pulling data, depending on your data set, down from the cloud. You could be looking at days or weeks. And if you want to accelerate it, typically those companies can accelerate it at a fee. So I would start, make sure that that RTO is not something that's aggressive enough where you can't be down for a day or two, because if all your data is off-site, you're going to be down for a day or two, in my experience.
Yeah, good answer. Hey, what I was thinking is you showed the one slide, actually it's slide 61, if you could go back to it.
Yeah.
If I were can I go backwards, by the way? Yeah.
Yeah.
If I were running a small business, I'd I'd want to stare at this slide and monetize some of this stuff or quantify some of this so that I could figure out what that cost is if I'm down, so that when I get a ransomware notification for $25,000, I can say, no way, or I better consider this, or something like that. How would you just it's 3 steps? Mm-hmm. How would you kind of activate this chart at a small business?
Yeah, that's a great point, because the hardest part is trying to figure out and monetize with that downtime. We've got a calculator that you can go to Datto.com and use. It's free, or you can just do this math on your own. But I would look at, very simplistically, how many employees do I have? What's the average salary, overhead? So if you're down for a day, you've got to pay them overtime to catch up on all that work. That's where I would start. I would look at how much revenue do I genuinely make in a day, and start breaking it down. You can even break it down hopefully by the hour, but if you start looking at what is a day of downtime, those are the components you could simply look at and look at it for a few minutes and take a step back. And then as you move backwards, you kind of do a deeper analysis of, all right, am I going to lose clients? Am I going to lose potential new clients? Try to put some numbers on that. But if you want to just start, I would do that. I would look at how many employees you have, including yourself, and how much revenue do you typically generate? What's your rent? All these different things to put together. This is what my business makes in a particular day, and that's what my downtime will cost me, and do it on a day-to-day basis. Again, there's a calculator. You go to Datto.com. There's an RTO calculator which you can do very simply to get to get started. And that's the baseline.
Yeah. So Budley asked a question here without Michael, without selling data in particular. I mean, if I'm sitting out there, so I go through this calculation you just did, and I come up with a number. And let's say it's like, oh gosh, that looks like a pretty big number. When do I feel like I could go out? Because you said one of the exposures of small businesses is, whether it was number 5 or number 6, was that they don't seek outside help, and it's getting very complicated, and we just say outside help. Well, that's all fine and dandy, if you're P&G or something like that. But if I'm this little company with $100,000 worth of revenue, I do the calculation, it spits out a number. Like how would I know then to say that's a number I need to go out and get some outside help? What price exposure point? Does it make any sense to calculate an exposure point and then conclude, I need help? And what would that be? Well,
I would look at it. It starts with that RTO piece that we just talked about, so that's a good segue. You start looking at how much downtime you would incur, whatever your solution is, try to come up with an estimate of, okay, I'm going to be down for 2 days, and that's going to give you a number. Now, you're already spending money on backup, so, not to give a data plug, but we've got solutions down to a single terabyte, even 250 gigs, all the way up to 120 terabytes. So we do have a focus on very small businesses at a price. So when you start looking at what that cost would be for the hardware and the monthly cost, start to take a look and say, okay, I could either be down for 2 days, or what we do is we'd be able to fail over. So your servers are down or encrypted, you'd fail over to that local device, and you're looking at minutes or hours of downtime instead of days or weeks. So you start to do that math. So the math would be, okay, if I'm down for 2 days, it's going to cost me X. I'm already paying whatever you're paying for your backup solution. And then you take a look at the data, or any kind of, not even deploy data, but any kind of business continuity solution, and figure out, okay, I could pay X amount a month, assuming that the average business is down just generally for 18 to 21 hours every year. So now you start to say, okay, if I'm down 18 hours, this is what it's going to cost me. Does this justify the cost? And like I said, it doesn't. It's not for everybody. You can only afford what you can afford, but that's the price point. That's the math you want to start doing. Can I afford? Would I be out of business if I'm down for a week? Well, maybe it makes sense to make this investment. That's where I would say. So there's not a specific dollar amount. It's going to vary, but once that RTO cost becomes too great based on whatever backup solution you have, that's the tipping point.
All right. So and then Lynn, I'll get back to you in just 1 second. But Bud is kind of following the conversation here. Is like, okay, you come up with that RTO amount, and when you do, in the process of doing that, all data doesn't have the same value.
Yeah.
How do you determine the value of the data? Actually, I had this exact conversation with my wife about her business just within the last week.
Yeah, so I usually look at it. There's 2 forms of data. You have your archival data, which you have to go back to, and you have your production data, which means I need access to this at all times. my business cannot operate without this production data. So there's two forms of that. That production data is really the data you want to make sure you have protected and you have that ability to pull that back very quickly. It's an archival piece of data that you might only need if a client asks you for it, or if you're an architectural firm, you've got old CAD files, whatever your industry is. That's data that you could probably absorb waiting for a few days to get back because you can still operate your business. It's that operational data that you cannot afford to lose or you will not be able to work. Those are the two forms of data that I like to look at. So the value of that data is far greater than the archival data, even though both are important.
Yeah. Okay, good answer. So Lynn asks the question, do you, I'm not sure if the you means Datto or available generally online, but do you have a website for business owners to prevent hackers from hacking into their business?
So that's aimed towards us. That's really not what we do. I don't know vendors that really would have that. We're kind of the last line of defense, so we're not on the intrusion protection. We're on the backup disaster recovery side. I don't know if you folks at SCORE have anything to point to. I mean, I can point to some articles on how to do it, but I don't think there's a vendor out there that would have a website for you to prevent the hackers, other than just educational stuff.
Yeah, so Lynn, that's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but I think that's, I don't know of any, and I don't think probably does. So, okay, any more questions? Let me just, while you're thinking about more questions, you got a real world-class expert here. So, we got a few minutes, not many, but 4 or 5. Think about the questions, and you got the opportunity to get a really good answer here. While you're doing that, let me just say, Michael made mention of GDPR during his presentation. And that's a European privacy law that was enacted sometime within the last 6 months. And you'll see it referred to by any of the websites that you go to that also is open in Europe. It's now asking you to do kind of the same kind of thing. If you want more on GDPR, we did a webinar on that. I believe it was in August. Doesn't matter. You go to our website, they're listed in chronological order. It was sometime in the last 2 or 3 months. And I don't have the exact date, but you can go there and get the latest and greatest on GDPR.
I'm interested in that as well. I'm going to take a look at that. Yeah. There's so much information about it that that's something that everyone should be aware of because that will trickle down. All of those regulations, it's coming here, so you have to get a head start on it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in fact, that was the bottom line message of the webinar was, here's what it is, here's why it's important, and you better get ready for it because it makes a lot of sense. So Bubby's still on fire here. He's talking about for email.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consider hosted exchange to be a viable backup solution? A good question for everybody.
Yeah, I think most people think it would answer this yes internally. I would say I wouldn't think that is a viable backup solution. Like I mentioned, I think you always need another piece of backup there. You always would need to look at another layer. So just having that as your only layer, I don't know that you'd be completely protected. I would always look for that other layer. One of the things that Gartner put out a statement that I reiterate all the time is whatever kind of technology solution you're buying or selling, assume that it fails. What happens next? What is that next piece? And so that's why I just believe in multi-layers. And again, it comes down to that price point where can you afford it and does it make sense? But ultimately, as many layers of protection as you could have, I would think would be the way to go.
Okay, great. That's all we have time for today. Michael, thank you a lot. It was very, very informative. So let's just in closing just say that I want to remind you that we do have another webinar coming up. But actually, we've got 4 more between now and the end of the year. The next one's on November 13th, and the topic is the art of professional rebranding. So on behalf of SCORE, thanks to all of those of you that attended today's webinar. Again, go to fairfieldcounty.score.org to see our list of webinar archives and also to understand our upcoming workshops and to just get a good sense of what SCORE can do for you. And again, Michael, thank you, and thank you to Datto Corporation for opening your facility to us. And everybody out there, Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.